Okay. So we are live stream now. So I'd like to call the meeting to order at 9:02 a.m. And we need approval of the minutes. Could I have a motion?
Motion to approve.
A second?
Robin, if we could, can we just call the meeting to order and do roll call?
Oh, yes, please do. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Supervisor Barger is absent, but she has a representative listening in, Anish. Vice Chair Carter.
Present.
Mayor Hepburn.
Present.
Member Gil Ivy. Member of the public.
Aki.
You. Member of the public, Ray Skelton.
Present.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Okay, now we'll move on to the approval of the minutes. And I believe, Tim, you made the motion?
Yes.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
Do you need to take a vote?
We do need to take a roll call vote. So Ray Skelton,
In favor?
Ivy,
Yes.
Mayor Hepburn,
Yes.
Chair Carter.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay, let's move on to item number 3, amendment by bylaws.
I'll handle this one. When the PFA was first established by the city in 2017, we had adopted some immediate bylaws to govern the board. But as Laverne was one of the first EIFDs and the Public Financing Authority, we kind of had to model it after some other previous boards, but not necessarily really specific to EIFDs and this specific Public Financing Authority. Since then, obviously, the county has joined the EIFD, and because of state law, there's a position on the board, and so we had a need to amend those bylaws to include the county. But with doing that, we also made some other further clarifications and modifications. So briefly, those were further defining the role of the board, defining the duties of the executive director, changing the timing of the election of officers. Previously, it had said that the election of officers was required to happen, I think, like at the last Thursday of July or something very specific. And so we're modifying that to just say at the first scheduled meeting after July 1st that the election of officers would happen on an annual basis. Also clarifying the regular meetings. Previously, the bylaws that we would have a meeting once a month, and we don't feel that's necessary. Obviously, we haven't been having one meeting every month, so we're proposing to modify that to being the second Wednesday of each quarter. So it'd be in March, June, September, and December of each month at 9 a.m. So that's basically today's schedule. So hopefully that this is a day in the month that works for everybody else like it does this morning, and that we can kind of schedule this as a permanent placeholder for these meetings to be that second Wednesday of in each quarter, the first month of each quarter. And then most importantly is modifying the bylaws to provide how they're amended, but also allowing for the supervisor to appoint so what I'm looking for.
A representative.
Yeah, a representative or a replacement basically for her on the board, because obviously her schedule is very busy. This is something that the county's already done in West Carson, which is a fully county EIFD. So Anish, that's on the call here today, is her planning deputy and would be basically appointed if these bylaws are amended as such. After this meeting, the supervisor could send in a letter to this board, basically appointing Anish to sit in her seat, and then he would become a voting member of this PFA on her behalf. So that's kind of what these amendments cover. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
And the only thing I'll clarify, Peter, you've looked at these as far as this last amendment, because we know what was written into state law, and we were concerned that it had to be the elected member, but this is an acceptable alternative to that.
Okay, any questions?
No, it sounds like they've got it covered.
Yep.
Okay, then at that point, we need to motion to approve the amendments to the bylaws.
So moved.
Did I hear someone make the motion?
Yeah, Gilbert, so moved.
I'll second.
Okay, thank you. All right, and back to roll call. Member Skelton,
I approve.
Member Ivy,
Approve.
Mayor Hepburn,
Yes,
Vice Chair Carter.
Yes.
Good. Congratulations, Anish. You will be put in as the representative, and I know it'll alternate depending on meetings, right? If Supervisor Barger can make a meeting, she will be here. Otherwise, you will sit in her stead. Now, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think you had said, but that doesn't mean that I want to be the chair. We will defer to Vice Chair Carter to represent when Supervisor Barger is not here.
Yeah, I think we would be okay with that.
Okay, perfect. As long as that's good of the group.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay.
Okay, then let's move on to the update on financing options.
Great. We will be doing a share screen here, and I will take most of the item, but Eric and I will tag team on it. Over the last 6 months or so, you know, we put the framework in place and the financing structure for the EIFD. Now the question becomes, how do we finance projects to get things done? And we have engaged Cosmon and Associates, because we've already been working with them very closely on what options would be available for the PFA to consider. Because ultimately, it's going to be your decision to make on how we take on funding these projects. So we evaluated some of the options, and this was actually, this is excerpts of a presentation that was done at a study session with the city council. So I apologize, Robin and Tim, you're going to get a lot of the same information that you've already received. But as you'll see as we go through this, we felt it was important to get that understanding of where the council was at for the city's part before we came forward to the PFA. So now council was favorable of the city at least exploring their support of participating, and I'll explain that as we get further into it. But before I go into the presentations, are there any questions at the outset of this? Okay. All right. So as we all are familiar, the purpose of the impetus for the EIFD and the projects that were in there were to take the visioning document of the Laverne adopted specific plan, which gave life or a visionary to what you'll see on the right side, the potential new development. And how do we take the existing conditions that are there to improve them, to entice the development to occur? And so that's the goal. And then from that, there were the projects that had been identified that needed to be done. But as we started to build the financing models, we needed to make some assumptions on while the specific plan identified much greater building potential. When we do the analysis, we have to realize that the development market is not necessarily going to build to that overall capacity. They're going to build to what their expectation of what they can sell or they can rent or whatever the case. So these key land assumptions that you see here are not what's identified in the specific plan, but it's a reduced version more in line with what the development community reality looks like. And that's important because that helps to build what the land value and the area value projections will be. So it's a more realistic look of how much money will be generated, we expect to be generated through the course of the EIFD area. So as I mentioned, the projects that were identified in the initial proposal and infrastructure plan are all these that you see listed here. But within that in those projects, not all projects are equal in priority. And we've identified in bold those projects that we think from a staff level of looking at this are our priority projects that need to be initiated sooner rather than later. And and the reasoning for that is that there's two threads. The first is when we're looking at the most significant project is the pedestrian bridge. It's also the most expensive project. It's also the most complicated project because it ties into the parking lot that's on the south side. And then it also is expected to tie in on the private development that's going to occur on the north side parking lot, the south side development that is on Fairplex. And so there's a lot of moving parts that need to be addressed even as we're doing the design, never mind the construction. So this project has a longer lead time, and so it's a priority project to start working on now. The other remaining projects you see there, the median highways, the lighting and landscaping, the connectivity, are all important because they're about how do we improve the area aesthetically for that developers can see the benefit to investing in the area, but also we want to try and get these projects done ahead of the goal line itself because it just makes more sense as the line comes into service that we have the ability to move people where we want them to be, into our old town or over and across to the university. So that's why those have been identified as the greater priority projects. I'll stop there and just check and see if there are any questions. Okay. So those projects, and is it on this one? Yeah. The reality of those projects is just over $10 million in total. And so the issues are, it's a little chicken and egg, and it's really indicative of tax increment districts and financing. It was similar to what existed under redevelopment agencies in the early years, that there's not sufficient because the revenue that's generated is about the growth in the property value and the excess above that gets directed into it. Well, that takes time to accumulate enough money to support issuing of bonds to fund those projects. And that's ultimately what this financing authority will have to do, is issue some type of commitment to pay through the future, because we just can't wait to get cash on hand to do this work. It'll just never happen. So the issue of trying to undertake those projects sooner so that we can create the developer interest becomes kind of stuck behind how do we then generate the funds to start the projects without having the district generating the money. And as I said, the current estimates for the pedestrian bridge and undergrounding, and I will honestly tell you the $6 million may be light based on some of the things we are starting to experience, is necessary to do the pedestrian bridge. And then those other bolded items that you saw on the prior page add up to just over probably close to $4.5 million as we have estimated now. So the questions for this group become, what approaches can we take to try and staff is looking at as ways to get to a point to fund sooner. And one approach, and obviously we are pursuing and have actually at this point the design of the pedestrian bridge, a majority of it, is to obtain funding with grants and other outside funding sources. There's going to be first mile, last mile, sub-regional dollars, state dollars. There's also going to be regional dollars through our Prop C and Measure R and other funding options that we have at a local return level. That's a way. It won't pay for all the projects, but it can mitigate and cut down some of the costs that we'll need to lean on the EIFD to support. The next is, and this is what Cosmont spent a lot of time evaluating for us, is, EIFDs are new. And there's only a very few in the state. So that's one thing investors, when they don't understand something, there's a risk in issuing public bonds to that degree without a significant interest rate. So one of the options, I almost went backwards out of my chair. One of the options is a direct placement, so private financing on a short-term bond. But what that looks like, and I am not in favor of this, is basically a negative amortization loan, if you will, that our payment, because we can't support the debt service payment for even just the interest. So the concept is you issue, I'll call it a $5 million bond. You make whatever payment you can, and it's a short term, and it's followed by a reissuance at a later date at a higher amount because you've added interest into your original principal. And then you're issuing for a 30-year at a higher amount, at a higher principal, but your payment is less because it's now over the 30 years. Not crazy about the idea, but it's an option. The third option is the city fronts the funding, and there's a repayment agreement, and this was done under redevelopment agencies earlier, that there's a repayment agreement with the financing district, the PFA, that the city will be paid back at some point in the future for whatever they're fronting, whether it be in hard dollars or in a bond issuance itself. And then the third option is to wait for the increment levels to increase to support payment of a bond. And roughly for that $4.5 million, and you'll see it on the next chart, that we hit that critical number based on the projections we've gotten from our property tax consultant and where we crystal ball when development will occur. It doesn't happen until year 10. And that assumes the county's participation and the city's participation collected into that. And I would say you would not want to, if you were going to go that approach, you don't want to issue until you have ongoing sustainable revenue to support that annual payment. Yes, you'll have a residual balance, and those dollars can go cumulative balance that can be used for certain things, but you shouldn't lean on that to depend on your bond payment. You're using a fixed revenue to pay an ongoing cost. So the first question, and I'll back up the slide one, is those four approaches right there. I have a couple other slides to go through, but I'd like to spend a couple minutes and just discuss with the board kind of what their feelings are on those options before we go further. And I will tell you, when, as I mentioned before, when we presented this to the council, they were supportive, and I can certainly let Robin and Tim speak to this, of the city participating with that understanding. And we would have to come back with the agreements to that extent. So this is really conceptual at this point, but before staff spent any time moving in those directions and looking at those options, we wanted to get with council and with the PFA. So I'll stop there for a minute and open it up for thoughts, questions.
This is Gilbert. First off, I'm pleased that the council sees the benefit in doing this, because there's no reason why Laverne, as small as we are, can't still think big, and big in terms of the future of the city and improvements coming in. And I happen to think that much like Orange County did in its past, even though they had a lot more money, they did big things out into the future and then financed them later, and look at them now. So I think that I'd like to hear a little bit more about that direct placement, the issue that you said Cosmont studied. That's interesting. Although I know you don't support it, Bob, but give me a little bit more about that. I'm not quite understanding it.
Okay. So it's basically issuing a bond, but rather than going to the open market at this point, you are going to a private institution where there's access to capital, that it'll be issued, and it'll be structured. Say their example was a 5 to 7 year bond when they did the analysis for us. So if we issued, say, a $5 million bond, as you could tell by, and this would be the finance authority issuing a bond on their own, not involving the city at all, just the financing authority saying, we're going to do this, and we thank you, city, for your willingness, but we're not going to lean on you. We're going to take this on ourselves. Right now, we don't have enough incoming revenue to support that payment of close to $250,000, $300,000 for a 30-year bond. So what you do is you issue on a short period, and it's not even an interest-only payment, it's something short of that. But then 5 to 7 years later, when you've accumulated enough to support a payment, then you go out to the market and you issue, but you're issuing with your principal plus any unpaid interest. So rather than it being 5 million, maybe it's 5.5 or 6 million that you have to issue, and then you're paying interest on that. So you're paying interest on interest when you get out. The only reason to do that is if you didn't, as I see, is if we couldn't come up with a way to get support for the city, from the city to front that money. It just seems to make more economic sense in my mind, but that's certainly why I wanted to discuss it with this group too. Does that make sense, Gil?
Yeah, thank you. I get that now. I've seen
Okay.
people in forbearance loans when they had to redo their mortgages, and they had to do something similar where they had to do negative amortization and then had to pay it back later on an extended payments, but the payments were less. I get it. I see it.
Right.
Mhm.
Other questions?
You know, Bob, just a real quick question. If we do it this way with the city fronts, the funding, we would still be able to obtain funding with grants. Is that not correct or incorrect for this?
Oh, no, absolutely. That's
Yeah.
that's kind of the first layer. We're going to
Yeah.
pursue those grants. I mean, even if the pedestrian bridge, I'll use that as an example. We received the funding for almost $900,000 in the design of it
Right.
from the COG. So we're going to be, because of that, the next round of COG funding is coming in another year. We're going to
Yes.
put in for the cost of the pedestrian bridge. We may not get all of it through the COG, but we're hopeful that we will get some significant amount of, let's say, the $6 million cost of construction. That'll be our first tier. There will still be some amount that we need to lean on, whether it be future PFA or the city, to help finish filling in the gap. But we're going to try and find anybody else's money we can before we use either EIFD or city money to pay for these projects.
Right. So basically what we're saying, we're not restricted whatsoever. We can do the grant funding no matter what. And because there's going to be a lot of things that we're going to need for that. So we can continually do grant funding. It's not just because we're getting, if we do option 3, which is the, city fronts the money, and we can do anything we want to with grants for this project.
Yeah,
Okay.
and it will still be the first, if we can get some of these projects paid 100% out without touching either of those other sources, we'll absolutely do that as well.
Great.
Great.
And Bob, when you talk about city fronts the funding, that is not going out to the community going for any kind of bond or financing?
It wouldn't be the community, but the city, if we, and we will explore this further, but we'd be leaning on the city's credit. So the city would be the issuer if we decided to go the bond route. We would probably suggest doing that if that was of everybody's mind. And on the back end, there would be a reimbursement agreement. So the city's putting its credit on the line, the city's committing to pay for it. But on the back end, there's also an agreement with the PFA saying that at X point in the future, based on these projections, you're going to start making a payment back to the city to reimburse them for the payment of it. At some point beyond that, it's possible that we could reissue the bond under the PFA's name, and then the city's out of it altogether. But the obligation of the PFA reimbursing fully the city, because keep in mind, these are two distinct entities. Even though it's Laverne's EIFD PFA, it is still a separate entity. That's why we have these bylaws, these articles of incorporation. So it would in effect be paying back the city the full amount that the city has contributed to whatever point.
And how often are the payments from the county going to be coming in from property taxes?
So they don't come from the county per se. What happens is the county assessor's office has set up this, identified the properties that are in the district and set up on their tax rolls this calculation, which we are still trying to work through the correct calculation with them because they're still trying to figure it out, but nonetheless. So when you get a remittance, because it's just a transfer of funds, it says, here's what your general property tax is, here's what your EIFD is. And so it'll have the properties and what portion of that is from the city's contribution and what portion of that is from the county. So there's really no payment made as much as a transfer. That's done twice a year. And I think it's, and Anish, you may know better than I do, but I think it's in December and then it's like May or something like that.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. So Bob, do you feel you have direction from the committee?
Well, now let's go. I got a couple more slides and then I will point it, get more direction. So we talked about what the projections are. So we talked about the funding priorities. I just want to talk a little bit about the thoughts going back to Tim, your comments as far as looking at other funding sources outside of city or EIFD. And so the pedestrian bridge, we talked about the cost of this seems to be ever growing because it's a significant project. And one of the costs that is we're struggling with and probably won't be paid through COG or anywhere else, and that is the undergrounding of the lines. So we have a section from White to, we'll call it Fairplex, but it's probably not that whole way. And that is only 3/4 of a mile, give or take, that linear distance. And the cost to underground those lines is estimated to be between 3.5 to 4 million. Because they're distribution lines, there are other carriers on that line. It's a significant project to reduce those lines. So what we have done is there's rule, we'll call them Rule 20A credits. They say funds, but it's credits that cities have access to, that Edison kind of holds. They can't use them for anything else. They're used to underground utilities. We can buy other cities' credits at a reduced rate to fund this project, to fund the undergrounding. So if the project right now is 4 million and we can buy them, and it would be higher than this, but 50 cents on the dollar, we would only spend hard dollars of 2 million for a $4 million undergrounding project. So that's something that we still have to evaluate. We haven't gotten the final cost from Edison at this point, so we don't have a lot of answers on that just yet, but that's something that we will be pursuing. Now, where does that other $2 million come from to pay for those credits? That's where we may look to the city to do a just direct use of dollars out of a reserve fund that the PFA would eventually pay back. And we'll come back with more specifics, but that's one approach that we're looking at. The other alternative that we are also exploring is, rather than undergrounding, can we lift the lines far enough? And is that cheaper than trenching and pulling all these lines down? Can we just extend the lines up by, say, 10 feet? And is that an acceptable approach rather than having to go through the other effort? And what is the cost? Which one? Because we then can't use Rule 20A money to pay for that because we're not undergrounding, we're going up, and Rule 20A is only for underground. As far as the other priority projects, like I said, we'll be pursuing grant and other outside funding sources. But the other thing that's eligible within what the city receives, because these projects are all connected to mass transit, because they're revolve around the Gold Line station, the city receives annually as a add-on to property sales tax, Prop C local return, and it's roughly between $400,000 and $550,000 a year that we receive on a regular basis. Now, we use some of that money for other mass transit related projects, but city funds, non-general fund dollars, could be used to lean on to pay for part of these projects. And we've been slowly accumulating some money in anticipation of doing some not EIFD, but transit-oriented development projects connected to the Gold Line. So that's where we would look to, if we issued a bond at the city level, we would look to use these dollars to pay that debt service until the PFA can pick it up. And that's, we have identified we could support about $250,000 a year in a payment out of those dollars. And we've confirmed with the county and Metro that that's a permissible use of those dollars.
Okay.
And then this last one just kind of reiterates what we talked about, what I was just talking about, the two approaches, which was a direct loan for the utility work and then a bond payment for the other priority projects. And then I just have one more slide. So how would we see this coming together? The first part was to get direction from council on city support, which I've already shared with you what their indication was, to meet with you on reviewing the financial approaches and get your input on what direction you want to go. We would then want to go back and confirm our priority projects, update our cost estimates. We would need to spend some dollars to have some true engineering done on what those projects would be. We've estimated that, I think about $70,000 that we would need to. So it would give us some good, current, relevant, here's what your costs are going to be to do these projects. And then identify the amount of bond needed, whether it be the PFA or the city, and then come back to both groups with a finalized preferred approach on behalf of the PFA and the council. So I guess the direction that I need from this group is, do you want us to pursue the alternative of the city? Do you want us to wait until we accumulate enough? Obviously that delays us, but you're the governing board for these dollars and how they're used. And so with that, I got nothing else to say.
Okay, it's back to us. Comments? Some direction to Bob from this committee? Ray, do you have something you'd like to add?
Well, I think a couple things. One is nobody likes to wait, right? It's self-defeating to wait 8-10 years, maybe longer. We'll lose way too much there. So that doesn't seem to work. So what shorter term initiatives can we take? And obviously we want to Tim's point, have a parallel approach, seeking whatever sources of revenue we could from other parties, specifically grants, while we look for ways for the city to fund the projects up front. And I assume that if I understand it correctly, that's via a private bond that the city would use in order to do that. But I would support those two approaches versus certainly waiting or as Bob said, the approach where we pay an interest on interest. We don't want to do that.
And actually, let me just correct. Actually, if the city were to issue, we would not issue private placement. We would be able to issue on our credit a public, which would get us, and that would probably get us a more favorable interest rate, right? Than if the PFA were to go at it on its own, because the city has a really good line of credit. We do not carry a lot of debt. So we would be looked at as a very favorable risk.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, Gilbert.
Yeah, I'm with Ray on that one. I think that we don't want to wait. And I like the idea of the city participating. And as Bob mentioned, we do get a better credit rating using the city's wonderful background in the area. So I'm in favor of going forward with that.
Tim?
I'm basically agreement with what both gentlemen said. I think also too, I know we have a lot of restricted funds within our fund categories we have in the city, but I know that we've tapped those before to utilize them for special projects, but also paying them back. But if we were to do a bond, we would pay those back immediately. So, I mean, we have options. I like the grant options. I like the city financing options, but maybe using some of our funds that are not restricted, that are not tied to anything that we need, right away in order to get this thing going. Because I do agree with both Ray and Gilbert that we don't want to wait that long. This thing's gonna hit hard because the construction's moving very fast, as you know. Robin, you're on I should call it the L line now. It's the L
They're
line, but
changing the name again.
yeah. Oh, hey, great. Okay. Well, the name of the line that shall not be mentioned.
Let's get the gold line right now.
I know, yeah, the gold line, but I think that it's moving much more quickly than we all anticipated, and I think that we need to be ready for this. So I'm in agreement with the other two members also.
Okay, and I am too. Sooner the better. You know, we want to keep up with progress. As you know, the bridges in San Dimas or over Cataract is going to be constructed. Glendora is doing a bridge. People will expect progress moving along. And so I think sooner the better. And I love the idea of the city, city's approach, being involved, moving this forward, and then going for the grants also. And I don't want to leave out Anish. Would you like to say anything?
I think everybody here can speak more to the city's potential role in helping with the short-term financing, but I agree with the general sentiment that you want to strike while the iron's hot. When construction's going is the best time to get in and do the additional work that may be necessary. It minimizes your impacts to the communities and sort of is a more efficient use of dollars as well. Still, obviously, do believe that pursuing grants are another good course to take. Hopefully, there will be additional federal infrastructure bills coming, but ultimately, the great work that's already been done is a great way for us to identify and be ready if and when that funding becomes available.
Absolutely. And I don't want to leave off COG. They are a big part of this. Thank goodness they gave us, the approval to move forward with the overpass of the bridge. So Tim, please pass on as often as you can to COG how grateful we are for their support.
I appreciate that, Chair Carter, our Vice Chair Carter. Again, it's constant. They're excited about the pedestrian bridge, and they're constantly looking for funding. So it's a great body. 30, actually, it's 34 cities now because Pasadena came on board again, and the 3 municipality water and the districts. But Anish, I just wanted to say thank you to Catherine Barger, to Sandra, and the 5th Supervisorial District. They're tremendous help to us in the city, especially with COVID-related issues right now and the fast reopening. Hopefully, as our numbers drop, hopefully next week we got better news as far as what we can reopen. But I just really appreciate it on my level. I know our council and our city, we have an issue. We get answers quickly, and it's generally resolved. And it's just that great communication between the city and our supervisors that really help us as a small little city in the East San Gabriel Valley to move forward in these trying times we're in. So thank you for all of your staff for our city.
Absolutely. I will make sure to relay that message to the supervisor.
Please.
Okay.
Thank you, Vice Chair Carter.
I don't need a vote on this. I got my direction. It's pretty clear. So we will continue to work on the staff side of things and then be back to this group as well as the city council in some parallel course. Hopefully in the next 90 to 120 days is what I would hope to be able to bring some stuff back to you. These proposed agreements, not necessarily for execution, but here's how we see the structure actually working.
So wherever you are at that point in our June meeting, you could bring us up to date.
Of course.
Okay.
So, and I know we have public comment, but one thing I wanted to share for this group, and I actually haven't shared this with council yet, it's coming in your briefing tomorrow, so apologize, Robin and Tim, you're getting this here. One of the challenges relative to the project, the area itself, was the identification of the location of the parking lot. It was supposed to be a parking structure at one side at one point. Now it's gone to surface parking. So we, as council, as well as city, staff were concerned that here was going to be this parking lot literally right in the middle of our critical TOD area. So we had explored a couple options. We just received a letter last week from Metro, because Metro will end up becoming the owner of that property. And Pomona shared the same concern. So we worked through both supervisors, easy for you to say, supervisor districts. And those deputies, and ours is Dave Perry, and I don't remember who's on the other side, but they worked with us to meet with Metro and their real estate team. And they're committed to revising some of their shared land policies to be able to entice development to occur on that. So what needs to happen is a developer would come in, they'd have to commit to providing whatever commuter parking is there in some fashion, whether it be on a third tier or underground parking, whatever. And in exchange for that, they would get the property, the air development rights at a discounted rate.
Oh,
Right now, the Metro's policy doesn't make it economically enticing for a developer to do that.
mhm.
So they're going back to revise their policies that will make it where they could discount the land value by maybe 60%, I don't know. So that a developer can come in and say, yeah, I can do this development. I can also commit to that 200 and whatever number of parking spots are there, or find a reasonable alternative and do some type of TOD development, residential, mixed use, whatever that happens to be. So that's a pretty exciting piece of news, because Metro was warm to the idea, but we hadn't gotten far enough. We got a letter of them committing to making those changes, and we just got that letter. Like I said, I'll share it tomorrow to council in the briefing, but that's pretty good news. It won't happen before the goal line comes in, but at least since we have our specific plan, and Pomona does as well, Metro is willing to look at that and say, we know what your future look is, so we don't have to guess, so we can go out and market this to developers based on those standards.
Outstanding, outstanding.
So,
Great.
Yeah, that's actually really good news for them. We were always wondering about that, and restricting development. I think that's awesome. That really is. That helps a lot. That kind of pushes what kind of development we can have too, and actually adds to it, which is awesome. So
Mhm.
thank you.
Okay, before we go on to public comment, is there anything else anyone wanted to say?
I just had one real quick comment to go back, if you don't mind, Vice Chair Carter. Regarding the power line underground, I'm truly in favor of the undergrounding, because it's just an eyesore. We're not taking any properties now, and if we can possibly do that financially, I think that would be advantageous. Just my own personal opinion, but to bring those down underground and clean up that White Avenue, that really would be nice to see a clean area, even though it's not a real long distance, but it will make a huge difference in that area. So anyway, just a comment.
I agree with you, Tim, on that.
Thank you.
okay, thank you.
Peter, is there anything you have to say?
No, I think Bob covered it very well.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us today. Okay, let's move on to public comment. Eric, do we have anyone?
You do not have any requests to speak under public comment this morning.
Okay, thank you. Okay, then we will adjourn the meeting right now at 9:44,
Yeah.
and we'll see you in June.
Yeah, the next meeting would be on June 9th at 9 a.m. if you want to plug that into your calendars. please.
Okay, June 9th. Okay, wonderful. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
everyone. Have a
Thank
wonderful
you
day.
all.